Hello and welcome to this episode of Knobi Cooks. On today's menu is another summer dish. It's called salmon summer noodles with aubergine and fennel. It is perfectly suited for bringing a Mediterranean vibe into your home. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. For today's episode we will need our salmon. I've got 4 fillets, 2 fennels, the separated fennel greens, the aubergines, a single garlic clove and some spring onions. In addition to that, I've got some spices right here, a large pan with oil, a bowl, our pot and of course our noodles. In the first step we want to prepare our aubergines before we start cooking them. For this we halve them first and afterwards dice them up. The chunks you see me cutting right here are probably too large, so I recommend you add some more lateral slices before dicing your aubergine. This way you can achieve even smaller and finer dices, which is better for the next step anyway. Because as soon as we've got our aubergine all diced up, we will put all of the dices into the bowl which we prepared before. In this bowl we will salt the aubergines. The salt will draw quite a bit of water out of the aubergines. This will make them less spongy later on when we are cooking them. And the longer you let them sit salted inside of the bowl, the more water the salt will draw out of the aubergines. I would recommend you let them draw water for at least 10 minutes, though preferably you want to give them more time, say 15 to 20 minutes. We will also dice up the second aubergine. This aubergine I luckily cut into smaller dices. Salting your aubergines and letting them draw water is an important step if you want to prepare aubergines. If you have ever tasted spongy aubergines before, well, this step was probably skipped for their preparation. I would recommend you add this step for preparing aubergines no matter what you are doing with them, be it cooking, frying or grilling them. With that said, we can turn our attention to the aubergines. We will stir them so the salt spreads evenly, and then we will let them rest for 10 to 15 minutes. Let's continue. Now we will dice our garlic. Cut the garlic into as rough or as fine dices as you would like to have it. You can also use more garlic if you want to, though I just wanted to add a little subtle taste of it for this dish. Next up are our spring onions. We will simply cut those into slices. Cut all the way down to the white, but make sure you don't cut through some roots. And if you don't have any spring onions at hand, you can also use shallots or some kind of sweeter onion for this dish. Both of those alternatives are also very well suited for this dish. And if you don't like any onions in your dish, heck, then just leave them out. Put both the onions and the garlic aside for now, we will need them later on. And now we have already arrived at the last of our vegetables. And that's what I very much like about this dish, there's not very much cutting work needed. When it comes to cutting fennel, first cut away the fennel greens and set them aside, which I already did in the preparation for this video. Afterwards, you simply halve the fennel, and then you will need to cut out most of its stem. The stem is quite woody and hard, and you don't want it in your meal. As soon as you have finished that, you can simply cut across the fennel laterally as you see me doing here, and then dice it up. Since fennel can be quite crunchy, cut smaller dices if you don't like the crunchy texture in your food. Alternatively, you can also simply cook your fennel for a little bit longer. This will also soften the fennel up. Here it helps that the fennel consists of different shells, so it will fall apart into smaller pieces of its own. And that's basically it for the fennel. If you haven't already, now is the perfect time to set up your water for boiling, because very soon we're gonna need those noodles. Here we go, we have arrived at the last ingredient we need to cut, our salmon. Here, like for all of the other ingredients, cut across the salmon laterally and afterwards cut it into smaller or bigger dices, depending on how you want it to be. The salmon you see me using is frozen wild salmon. I'm not using cultured salmon because where I'm from, the wild salmon is simply cheaper, and while the salmon itself is a little less orange than the cultured one, I don't really think there's a difference in taste. or take whatever salmon you want to. Maybe it's the other way around for you. Okay, so our aubergines have drawn enough water. Since we don't want that water in our pan, we will simply pour all of the excess water away. And that's it, our aubergines are now ready for frying. So now with all of those preparation steps out of the way, we can finally start cooking. For this dish, I don't recommend you to start frying some of the ingredients while you're still cutting some of the other ingredients. And that's because we will need to start with our aubergines. And they in turn need their time for drawing water. So increase the heat on your pan and put in enough oil. I'm using olive oil here for frying. Whenever it comes to frying or grilling aubergines, make sure you're using enough oil. Because of their spongy texture, aubergines will always draw a lot of oil in the beginning. And that's until they get soft enough to release it again. And they will also release more of the water they contain. So don't be surprised when you're frying your aubergines and you look away for a second and look back and there's no oil left in your pan. That's just how aubergines work. And because of this behavior, it is very important to stir them thoroughly in the beginning. You really should not let them rest for too long after you have just put them into the pan. Stir first and let them rest later. If you look closely, you can see some oily specks inside my aubergine slices. And that's exactly what I meant when I said that the aubergines will draw up all of the oil. Here I'm putting the lid onto the pan so the aubergines will get steamed and will be done sooner. However, don't do that for too long or otherwise your aubergines might burn. As you can see, I'm already stirring them again, but they are starting to brown nicely. Another thing about the aubergine spongy texture is that if you let them rest for too long, the spongy texture leads to them burning really fast in your pan. You can see that in my pan they are already forming some specks of crust. Try to avoid that as much as you can. Though it is also no biggie. Later on we will add some liquid into the pan. This will help us to loosen and dissolve anything that has burned into the pan, which is great. This way you don't need to scrub the pan afterwards. So as you can see, my water is already boiling. The time has come to finally put the noodles into our pot. I always try to cook my noodles for as long as they display it on the packaging. This helps you to not overcook or undercook your noodles. Though if you're cooking them after some other time measurement, feel free to use that. I prefer my noodles with quite a bit of bite, so I may drain them half a minute to a minute earlier than they display on the packaging. But do as you like. In the next step, we will add the fennel into the pan. Make sure you don't miss any of the chunks. Here you can see what I have said earlier. The fennel has fallen apart into even smaller pieces than I initially diced it. That's thanks to its many shells. Stir the fennel under and keep cooking it with the aubergines. If you don't like the taste of fennel because you think it tastes like medicine, or for any other reason, I think you could also try to cook this dish with either zucchini or carrots, or maybe both of them. Try it out for yourself and see if you like the taste. Though for me the fennel just adds this extra note, this extra freshness to this dish, which simply makes this dish something special to me. Here too I put a lid onto the pan so the contents of the pan will get steamed and will be done sooner. It is a very convenient cooking tip that may save you a lot of time. And now we will add the last of our vegetables into the pan. Simply pour both the spring onions and the garlic to the other ingredients. And afterwards, as always, mix them under. Stir the contents of your pan once more. Now that we have added something cold to the pan, it should be steaming less. This is always a great time to season your food, because whatever container or mill you are using, if you are adding your spices and herbs while your pan is steaming like crazy, some moisture will enter your container. This will most likely lead to your spices or herbs sticking together more and more as time passes, which is especially annoying for powdery spices such as ground pepper or bell pepper powder if you ask me. So whenever you can, add your spices while your pan isn't steaming like crazy. The time for that may be when you have just put in some new vegetables or meat, or whenever you add some liquid into the mix, like tomato sauce or wine, or just plain water. Simply be aware of that whenever you season your food. Okay, now quite a bit of time has passed, our vegetables are mostly done. Now we will add the salmon into the mix. The good thing about salmon is that it cooks very fast, meaning you don't need lots of heat in your pan or your pot, and if you've already got some hot food in there, like a sauce or vegetables, like in this case, they will almost be able to cook the salmon by themselves without needing much additional heat. I hope you haven't forgotten about your noodles, because mine are just about done. So without further ado, let's take them to the sink and drain off the water. However, don't just pour away all of the noodle water down the drain. We will need to save some of it for our dish. For this, I'm using the bowl I have kept my aubergines in. I recommend you to rather catch too much water than too little. Any excess water we can simply pour down the drain later on, but we cannot conjure up any missing noodle water. Just make sure you're using a vessel which can withstand the sudden temperature shock of the boiling water. We are getting ever closer to the end. In the next step, we will simply add all of the noodles into the pan and then we will stir them under. Make sure all of the ingredients are mixed thoroughly. And now for some extra acidity, we will add some lemon juice into the mix. And for a more fruity experience, we will also add some lemon peel into the pan. You can use a fresh lemon if you want to, though I prefer my method of using a frozen cube of lemon juice and some frozen lemon peel, because I always have those around in my kitchen. And remember that noodle water we collected earlier on? Well, at this point we will also add some of it into the pan, though try to not drown everything you've got in your pan. That would be a bad idea. And afterwards just stir everything thoroughly. You can also see me scratching around in my pan a little bit. This way I want to loosen most of the crust which has formed earlier on when something burned in the pan. You made it! The dish is basically ready for eating. All you have to do now is serve it. Well, and if you want to be extra fancy, like I do, you can garnish your dish. Luckily we kept the fennel greens for this exact purpose. And if you happen to have it around, the perfect time for fresh basil has also come. Simply put small pieces of basil onto the plates you've already prepared. Next, add the fennel greens. For this, just pull it apart with your fingers into smaller pieces and then put those onto the plates. And finally, we don't want to forget a very important ingredient, our shaved Parmesan. Simply spread small pieces of Parmesan onto each prepared plate. If you prefer shredded Parmesan, you can use that too. Though if you ask me, shaved Parmesan is a better eye catcher than shredded one. And that's it for this dish. I hope you enjoyed this video. It really is one of my favorite summer dishes. The fennel makes it taste just so fresh, so it's perfectly suited for hot days and Mediterranean vibes. So go and try it out yourself and tell me how it tasted. And I will see you in the next video.